The air in Los Angeles felt different that morning. Crisp yet electric, like something was about to happen. The kind of day where fate quietly rearranges itself, waiting for the right moment to strike. Keanu Reeves walked alone, his leather jacket worn from years of use, his boots tapping against the pavement in steady rhythm. A city of millions pulsed around him, horns blaring, engines roaring, voices blending into the usual chaos, but he moved through it like a ghost, unnoticed by most. That was how he preferred it. He had no entourage, no security, no pretense. Just a man with purpose in his step, hands tucked into his pockets as he navigated the streets. There was something on his mind today. Something that had been pulling at him for weeks, maybe months. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he knew it when he saw it. A cafe sat on the corner, the kind of place that never changed. The neon sign flickered slightly, buzzing against the morning hum of the city. Keanu stepped inside, the door creaking softly as the scent of coffee and baked bread wrapped around him. A few heads turned, but he was a regular here. Fame didn't mean much in a place like this. Morning, Keanu. Oliver, the barista, greeted from behind the counter. The usual, Keanu said, his voice calm, steady. Oliver nodded, already pouring the black coffee as Keanu leaned against the counter, gaze distant. Outside, cars rushed by in a blur of steel and sunlight. He had always loved cars. Not the luxury, not the status, just the machines themselves. Their history, their stories. That was what brought him here today. He had heard of a dealership across town. A place that housed some of the rarest vehicles in the world. He didn't need another car. He wasn't here to flaunt wealth. But there was something about restoring an old machine, breathing life back into something forgotten. That, to him, was worth more than any price tag. Keanu took his coffee and stepped back into the city, the heat of the cup warming his hands. He had no idea that in less than an hour, he'd be standing in the center of something far bigger than a car purchase. A moment that would shake a business to its core, send ripples through the world, and remind everyone why respect is the rarest luxury of all. The dealership loomed ahead, a pristine glass fortress bathed in morning light. The name gleamed in bold silver letters above the entrance, an unspoken promise of exclusivity. Inside, it was a world apart from the streets of Los Angeles, silent, controlled, polished to perfection. Keanu stepped through the glass doors, the faintest echo of his footsteps swallowed by the plush carpeting. The scent of new leather and expensive cologne lingered in the air. A row of pristine luxury cars stretched before him, each a gleaming work of art, their price tags hidden behind unspoken rules of wealth. The moment he entered, the shift in atmosphere was almost imperceptible, but it was there. A pause in conversation. A flicker of glances exchanged. Not the usual recognition, not admiration, just quiet judgment. He didn't fit the mold. Dressed in a well-worn jacket, faded jeans, and boots that had seen more miles than any of these showroom cars, Keanu wasn't the kind of customer they expected. And that mattered here. He walked past clusters of employees in tailored suits, their attention laser-focused on customers adorned in designer watches and expensive jewelry. No one approached him. No one acknowledged him. It was as if he were invisible. But he wasn't here for them. His gaze locked onto something at the far end of the showroom, a car that stood apart from the others, a piece of history encased in flawless paintwork. It was rare. It was beautiful. It was exactly what he had been searching for. A small flicker of excitement lit his eyes as he moved closer, fingertips grazing the smooth curve of the hood. He could feel it, the weight of time in the craftsmanship, the stories hidden beneath the metal. "Can I help you?" The voice barely carried any real interest. Keanu turned to find a young salesman, his posture rigid, one hand still gripping his phone as if he'd rather be anywhere else. "Yes," Keanu said, his voice calm but clear. "I'd like to know more about this model." The salesman barely glanced up. "Hang on. I'll get someone." And just like that, he walked away, not looking back. Keanu exhaled, slow and steady, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. He wasn't offended. Not yet. But there was a shift, a subtle tightening of his jaw, a quiet understanding of the game being played here. A few feet away, hushed whispers carried across the showroom floor. Does he even know where he is? Doesn't look like he's buying anything. Keanu heard them. He simply chose not to react. He stayed by the car, studying the intricate details of its design, waiting. And then he felt it, the change in energy. A presence approaching. Measured steps. A posture that radiated control. When he turned, the dealership manager was already there. Richard. His suit was tailored to perfection, his expression composed yet calculating. He didn't look at Keanu the way a salesman looks at a potential buyer. He looked at him the way a bouncer sizes up someone who doesn't belong. This model, Richard said, his voice smooth but laced with something colder, is extremely exclusive. Keanu met his gaze, unshaken. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Richard tilted his head, scrutinizing him. There was a pause, a moment where Keanu could see the man's thoughts as clearly as if they were spoken aloud. He doesn't belong here. This isn't for him. Are you aware of what you're looking at? Richard asked, his tone somewhere between curiosity and condescension. Keanu's fingers tapped lightly against the polished hood. I think so. A small smirk played at the corner of Richard's mouth, as if he were indulging a child's fantasy. Well, he said, crossing his arms, I hope you're ready. This car isn't for just anyone. Something in the air shifted. Keanu didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply held Richard's gaze, a quiet stillness settling in his expression. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. Richard's smirk deepened, a glint of amusement flashing in his eyes. He had seen men like this before, dreamers, window shoppers, men who wandered in thinking they could touch luxury but never actually buy it. He wasn't about to waste his time on another one. He took a step closer, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the expensive flooring. I don't think you understand, he said, his voice lowering, like he was about to share a secret. This car, he gestured lazily at the gleaming machine between them, is not just a vehicle. It's a statement. A symbol of exclusivity. Of power. His gaze flicked to Keanu's worn boots and back up to his face, his smile turning sharper. It requires a certain caliber of owner. Keanu tilted his head slightly, as if considering the words. A slow exhale left his lips, measured, controlled. The tension between them was no longer just discomfort, it had become something far more dangerous. Richard chuckled, mistaking Keanu's silence for hesitation. You do realize this car costs more than some homes in Beverly Hills, right? He let the number hang in the air, expecting it to land like a knockout punch. It's not something just anyone can take home. Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. I'm aware, he said simply. That's why I'm here. The confidence in those words was unexpected. Richard's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he regained composure. Interesting, he murmured, rubbing his chin like he was examining a rare specimen. You seem determined. But determination isn't the same as qualification. Keanu's jaw tensed. Not out of anger, but because he recognized what this was. The assumption. The arrogance. The way people like Richard measured others not by who they were but by what they wore, what they flaunted. A hush had settled over the showroom. Employees, clients, even the receptionist pretending to be occupied at her desk, all of them were stealing glances, their curiosity outweighing their professionalism. Richard exhaled through his nose, shaking his head like he was about to do Keanu a favor. Look, I don't know how to put this more simply, he said, voice dropping an octave. But models like this attract a certain clientele. People who understand what they're buying. His smile thinned. And with all due respect, you don't exactly fit the profile. Silence. Keanu didn't react right away. He simply studied the man in front of him, gaze unreadable. And then, in a voice so quiet yet so cutting it could slice through steel, he repeated one word. Profile. Richard's grin widened, sensing the upper hand. Yes, he said smoothly. Our cars aren't just machines. They're symbols of success, exclusivity. They belong to those who have, how should I put this, earned their place. He gestured vaguely at Keanu's jacket, his jeans, his boots. And this, he let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. Not exactly the look of someone who belongs. The weight of those words settled over the room like a thick fog. Keanu's fingers flexed slightly, but his posture remained the same, calm, composed, unshaken. His next words came without hesitation. Curious how you seem to know so much about people just by what they wear. He let it linger, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. That says more about you than it does about me. Richard's smile twitched. For the first time, there was something else behind his expression, irritation. He stepped closer, lowering his voice but keeping the same arrogant lilt. Listen here, buddy, he said, his confidence shifting into something meaner. I see guys like you all the time. You walk in, look around, take a few pictures, pretend you belong. And then you leave. His eyes narrowed. If you're here to play pretend, I suggest you don't waste any more of my time. Something shifted in Keanu's stance. A subtle change, almost imperceptible. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even frustration. It was something quieter. More dangerous. And what if I'm not here to pretend? Keanu asked, voice steady. Richard let out a short laugh, shaking his head like he had just heard the most ridiculous thing in the world. Then I'd say you're in the wrong place, he sneered. Because this place is for people who can pay. People who have something to prove. He leaned in slightly. And honestly, you don't look like you have either. The room had gone completely silent. Even the soft background music seemed to have dimmed under the weight of the moment. Keanu studied Richard for a long time. And then, he did something unexpected. He smiled. A small, knowing curve of his lips. Not amused. Not angry. Just a quiet understanding of exactly the kind of man standing in front of him. Funny, Keanu said, voice even, controlled. I always thought real luxury was treating people with respect. His gaze locked onto Richard's. Maybe you should think about that. Richard's face darkened, the veins in his neck tightening. He had controlled this conversation from the moment it started, but suddenly, he was losing it. His jaw clenched, his breath sharpened. And then, before he could think, before he could stop himself, he moved. A sharp, aggressive step forward. A hand curling into a fist. A moment of pure instinct, of fragile ego breaking under the weight of its own arrogance. The second his fist shot forward, Keanu moved. Effortless. Swift. Controlled. He caught Richard's wrist midair, stopping it before it even reached him. Time seemed to freeze. Richard's breath hitched, his body stiffening as he realized, Keanu wasn't just some random man in a leather jacket. The grip wasn't aggressive. It wasn't forceful. It was calm. A quiet, undeniable strength. Keanu leaned in slightly, voice barely above a whisper, but it carried more weight than any shouted threat. The anger you're feeling? His grip on Richard's wrist didn't tighten. It didn't need to. It's not about me. He tilted his head slightly. Maybe you should look at why that is before you take it out on other people. And just as effortlessly as he had caught it, he let go. Richard stumbled back a step, humiliated, breath uneven. But he didn't say a word. Keanu adjusted his jacket, gaze sweeping over the room one last time. Employees. Customers. The silence was deafening. And then he turned and walked toward the exit. The moment the glass doors closed behind him, the weight of the moment settled. Richard swallowed, his face still flushed, his composure shattered. But he wasn't just humiliated, he was being watched. A young man in the corner of the showroom, gripping his phone tightly. Recording. Not just the last few seconds. The whole thing. Richard's eyes locked onto the device, his stomach turning to ice. And somewhere out in the city, Keanu Reeves disappeared back into the morning light, completely unaware that within hours, the world would know exactly what had just happened. The internet moved faster than anyone expected. By the time Keanu Reeves had finished his coffee at another quiet corner of Los Angeles, the video had already begun its ascent into viral infamy. It started as a small post, a clip uploaded by a young man who had witnessed everything from the shadows of the dealership floor. A few hundred views turned into thousands. Thousands into millions. The world didn't just watch, they reacted. The comments flooded in, relentless and furious. How do you disrespect Keanu Reeves of all people? This guy could buy the whole damn dealership if he wanted. The audacity. Not even about the money. It's the arrogance. The way he was treated like he didn't belong. That's the real problem. The hashtag started almost immediately. Hashtag respect his luxury. Hashtag learn from Keanu. Hashtag fire the manager. The clip spread across platforms like wildfire, shared by celebrities, influencers, and everyday people who saw something bigger than just a confrontation. This wasn't about Keanu. This was about power, about privilege, about the quiet humiliation that so many had faced in places just like that. The backlash hit the dealership like a tidal wave. Their social media accounts were flooded with demands for an explanation, for an apology. Review pages were bombarded with one-star ratings, condemning their arrogance, their discrimination. News outlets picked up the story. Blogs, entertainment sites, even mainstream media latched onto the scandal. And at the center of it all was Richard. The man who had stood so tall in his kingdom of polished floors and overpriced cars was now the villain of the internet's latest morality tale. His face, his words, his sneer, all frozen in time, replayed in millions of screens, dissected in articles, ridiculed in memes. The dealership scrambled for damage control. Statements were issued. A carefully worded apology was posted, talking about miscommunication and unfortunate misunderstanding. No one bought it. Employees began to speak up, anonymously at first, but soon, their voices joined the chorus of condemnation. Richard always treated customers like that. He judged them by their clothes, by their watches, by how expensive their shoes looked. It wasn't just Keanu. It was anyone who didn't look rich enough for his standards. The dealership's biggest clients, those who actually could afford their overpriced inventory, began pulling out. Meetings were cancelled. Deals were dropped. The elite didn't like bad press, and right now, this place was radioactive. Then, the inevitable happened. Richard was fired. Not with fanfare, not with a press conference, just a quiet removal. His name disappeared from the company's website, his LinkedIn quietly updated. The dealership issued another statement, this time more desperate, more apologetic. We take these matters seriously. Respect is at the core of our values. The actions of one individual do not reflect the beliefs of our company. Too little, too late. By then, the damage was irreversible. Their reputation was burned into the internet's memory, immortalized in articles and YouTube comment sections. The dealership still stood, but its prestige, the untouchable exclusivity it once exuded, was gone. And through it all, Keanu Reeves remained silent. No public statement. No interview. No attempt to fan the flames. He had walked out of that dealership without looking back, and he had no intention of revisiting it. But while the world debated, raged, and dissected every second of that video, Keanu had already made a decision. He still wanted that car. Just not from them. The search led him somewhere different. Not another glittering showroom, not another palace of overpriced metal and glass. Instead, he found himself standing in front of a much smaller, humbler dealership on the other side of the city. The kind of place where the floors weren't marble, but the people greeted you with a handshake and a genuine smile. When he stepped inside, the contrast was immediate. There was no tension in the air. No judgmental glances. No whispers. Just the soft hum of conversation, the quiet appreciation of craftsmanship. An older man stood behind the counter, dressed in a simple sweater, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He looked up as Keanu entered, and for a moment, there was no recognition, just a friendly nod. "Morning," the man said. "Anything I can help you with?" Keanu took a breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, and exhaled it just as easily. "Yeah," he said, glancing around. "I think you can." The air inside the small dealership was different. No tension, no judgment, just the quiet hum of engines resting beneath polished hoods. The man behind the counter, Sam, studied Keanu with the same even gaze he had given every customer who had ever walked through his doors. There was no flicker of recognition, no widening of the eyes at the sight of a movie star. Just a simple question. "What are you looking for?" Keanu took another glance around. The place was unpretentious, built more on passion than profit. Cars lined the walls, some vintage, some newer, but each carefully chosen. He could tell. The difference between this place and where he had come from was stark. This wasn't a temple to excess. It was a shrine to the love of the machine itself. "I'm looking for something with history," Keanu said, his voice thoughtful. "Something with soul." Sam nodded like he understood exactly what that meant. He set his glasses down on the counter, motioned for Keanu to follow him through a side door into the garage. The smell of motor oil and old leather filled the air, the sound of tools clinking faintly in the background. And there it was. The car. It wasn't flawless. The paint had seen better days, the body carried whispers of the past in every subtle imperfection. But it had presence. It had a story waiting to be retold. Keanu ran his hand along the hood, feeling the weight of time beneath his fingertips. This was it. Not just a car. A restoration project. A second chance. Sam watched him carefully. "Most people come in here looking for something brand new," he said. "Something flashy. You're not most people, are you?" Keanu smiled faintly. "No," he said simply. The deal was made with a handshake. No arrogance, no theatrics. Just an agreement between two people who understood the value of something beyond its price tag. A few days later, Keanu posted a single photo. Nothing grand, nothing elaborate. Just him standing next to his new car, Sam beside him, both of them smiling. The caption was short. "True luxury is respect. Thank you for reminding me of that." The internet exploded. The message hit deeper than anything he could have said in an interview. The contrast was undeniable, the sterile arrogance of the first dealership versus the quiet authenticity of this one. The story had already been a wildfire, but now, it became something else. A movement. People shared their own experiences, times they had been dismissed, overlooked, made to feel small just because they didn't fit the expectation of wealth or success. The hashtags surged back to life. Hashtag respect is luxury. Hashtag learn from Keanu. Hashtag dignity first. Other businesses took notice. Dealerships, boutiques, hotels, places built on exclusivity suddenly found themselves reassessing the way they treated their customers. Some embraced the lesson. Others ignored it, and watched as the world moved on without them. As for the first dealership, the consequences had only just begun. The scandal had faded from the headlines, but the damage was permanent. Their once loyal clientele had been replaced by an empty showroom, their name now synonymous with the very thing they had once prided themselves on, elitism without substance. And Richard? He had become nothing more than a cautionary tale. A reminder of what happens when arrogance blinds you to the simple truth: respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost everything. Meanwhile, Keanu didn't look back. He spent the following weeks working on the car, hands deep in grease, finding joy in every bolt, every adjustment, every layer of paint that restored the machine to its former glory. And when it was finished, he didn't keep it. He auctioned it. Every cent went to charity. At the event, when asked about it, he only shrugged with that familiar, quiet smile. "This car was just an object," he said. "Until this story unfolded. Now, it carries something far more valuable." A journalist leaned forward, intrigued. "And what's that?" Keanu looked at the car, the crowd, then back at them. "A lesson," he said simply. "That we all have the power to inspire change. As long as we lead with respect." The applause that followed wasn't just for him. It was for the idea, for the shift that had started with a single moment, a single confrontation in a showroom where one man had underestimated another. The world moved on, as it always does. Trends faded, stories became memories. But this one endured. A quiet reminder whispered in the back of people's minds whenever they walked into a store, sat down at a restaurant, stepped into a showroom. Because in the end, luxury wasn't about the cars, the watches, the designer suits. Luxury was dignity. And respect. That was the rarest commodity of all.